All right, so I'm gonna do another podcast. So I did one last semester. This time I was thinking of doing a solo one. I was kind of interested in doing something like this since I watch political commentary channels and they have podcasts, but it's usually just solo commentary. So I always kind of wanted to try that, and I kind of have a Ben Shapiro setup. I don't know. Thought it'd be kind of interesting to do. So let's go start it. So pretty much, I think we kind of already know what we're going to be talking about. Part of this assignment. Pretty much going to be about the importance of film through sociology. Now, this is kind of more in my wheelhouse because, you know, I work in education and I'm also a sociology major. And I'm also have interest in working in higher ed. So this is really like my wheelhouse, you know, it's something that will be interesting. So when it comes to film and sociology, you know, I can kind of see where the lines are going to be drawn with what side you're going to be on, really. So over, you know, using film through sociology or doing more traditional methods, you know, more of the old school approach would be, you know, research papers, lectures, you know, stuff like that versus the more contemporary style of, you know, watching a movie and analyzing it, or a TV show, documentary, things of that nature, you know, in the more digital age. So it kind of brings up, obviously it kind of brings up the question of, you know, can film deepen our understanding of sociology, or like I think May even brought up, is it just a excuse to go watch films and TV shows? So as someone who works in education, I'm gonna side more with the films. And this, now granted, I work in an elementary, so how I go about doing my teaching to be very different from higher ed. And the biggest one is that I have to do more active learning. Like, I can't just go up on the board and just say, okay guys, this is A, this is B, B makes buh. Like, I can't do that. I'm gonna lose the kids' attentions. Nobody's gonna care. The classroom's gonna be a mess. It's not gonna stick. It needs to be active. So if I'm teaching pre-K, I have to do songs and videos and music. Like, I gotta sing. The class has to sing. And when you do that over and over again, eventually it will stick. And that's just how a lot of social emotional learning works when you're working with pre-K. You know, like, you have to do that social emotional because that's where the kids are at developmentally. And it still even works for the other grades, you know, throughout our own lives, even up to adulthood still works. I mean, think about it. There's old jingles that get in our head. We sometimes even use the old ones back in elementary. Like, I still use the ABC song to go categorize things, you know? So it's stuff that I do all the time, you know, and it impacts people. And we'll get more into detail on this, but there's just more evidence backing that way of learning, using different forms of media, making it interactive. There's way more evidence to back that as the more effective strategy over, again, kind of the pervasive idea of, I just go on the board and I yap the whole time and you just sit down and just take notes and listen to me. You know, that just, again, not to say it doesn't work for everybody, but when you go look at the data and the general statistics, it just isn't as effective. So we'll go over my thesis that I wrote. So in general, in short, with sound instructional practices, keyword sound instructional practices, film analysis can enhance sociological learning by offering a wider framework for critical engagement. Such variety promotes stronger comprehension of complex sociological concepts, fosters more dynamic critical thinking skills, and breaks down cultural and socioeconomic barriers. So, a lot to unpack there. I'll get into more details. And again, I think the key word of my whole opinion on this is sound instructional practices, because that's going to really hinge a lot of this. So the three main reasons I have: promoting stronger comprehension of sociological concepts, fostering more dynamic critical thinking skills, and breaking down cultural and socioeconomic barriers. Those are my three reasons that I use to support having more usage of film through sociology, or even just arts in general. Even you can even go, like, this isn't even exclusive to film, art, music, things of that nature. So, and I'll link all my sources in the comments for this video, but I have one source, and this is from, so it is teaching sociology, but it is through the American Sociological Review, and the title is called Engaging Students Using an Arts-Based Pedagogy, Teaching and Learning Sociological Theory Through Film, Art, and Music. So this study was done in 2022, but it uses previous research that is over a decade old to kind of build off of it and to see, is it still true over 10 years later? And so pretty much what they found, and I highlighted and quoted this, in the research, it states that findings reveal that employing this art-based pedagogy helps students to sustain an interest in the course material, understanding the theoretical course material. Interest in the course material, theoretical course material, engage in a higher level of thinking/analysis, feel more confident in their abilities to write about theories covered in the course, apply theory in the real world, contextualize historical content, and enhance their memory of theories and concepts. All right, so let's go break this down. So the first two things that the findings show is a higher interest in the material and the theoretical concepts, a better understanding of it. So that in and of itself proves the first reason I brought up, which is promoting stronger comprehension of sociological concepts. Now, as an educator, having an interest in something radically changes everything. Like, if you're not interested in something, it's gonna have a way harder time wanting to actually learn it. Like, I've seen people, and there's whole memes on this where they'll literally write pages upon pages glazing LeBron, but will use ChatGPT to go do their basic biology homework. Like that, and that's the important thing. Like, for learning, you actually have to be interested in it. But unfortunately, a big problem that usually happens is that it usually happens in middle and high. It does happen at elementary, but I wouldn't say it's as severe. But middle and high, it really starts to come up where kids just aren't interested in what they're learning. That natural child curiosity, by middle school, it's gone, man. Like, it's not there anymore. And so teachers really have a hard time trying to get their students to engage and actually show some kind of interest with it, But it doesn't help that, you're already doing a subject you might not like. Already that's a big uphill battle to begin with, but that happens across everybody. Like, it's not exclusive to just a group of kids or a school. Like, there's gonna be subjects and materials that we don't like, and so it's gonna be harder for us to get involved and be interested and engage. And that's gonna happen across the board for various subjects and fields. So there's really no way to get around that aspect. But there's different instructional strategies that you can do to not make that as big of a deal and try to overcome it and lessen it, But it doesn't help that, unfortunately, by the time you get to middle and high school, so many teachers are just going on top of go on the board and be like, blah, 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 blah. They're just yapping and yapping and yapping. And so it's like, well, obviously the kids aren't going to get engaged because they don't want to learn about the material to begin with because they're not interested in it. And you're not helping either by just yapping on the board the whole time. Like how am I supposed to be interested in statistics if you're just gonna yap the whole time? Like why should the problem is it just bores people and it doesn't work for everybody. Again, there's plenty of students where it works, but it's very difficult for students who already don't have a passion for the subject and already aren't nerds for it. So it's very difficult to really be invested in what the professor or teacher is trying to say and talking about on the board for the 3-hour lecture. It becomes very difficult when there isn't an already existing passion and you already are having just students really not being engaged with the material. They just have to sit back and be and just take notes or whatever. That's where a bunch of problems start coming up, but as this research already shows, by adding film into the conversation, now you get a little more interest from people, because now it's not just about, you're writing notes about, Durkheim or Marx. Now you're talking about, oh, this is a movie that I like to watch in my free time, or, oh, I love this movie. Now there's a different component. Now you added a little, something, a little something to it, So now people are going to be a little more engaged with it because now you added that little interest to it, And so maybe going through your lectures might not be that bad, So it builds on something, and there's something you can work with there. And so it shows that it improves people's interest with it, and then that ends up leading to a better understanding of the sociological theories. So it's a useful tool to get people's attention and to really get people to actually be interested in what you're talking about, because you're taking in something that they already have an interest with and tying it to whatever theory or concept you're talking about that week. Now, my second reason is fostering more dynamic critical thinking skills. So in the findings in the quote I cited, it pretty much says engaging in higher level of thinking and analysis, feel more confident about their writing and application of theory and contextualization of historical content. So writing, applying, contextualizing, all those things I would fall under more dynamic critical thinking skills, because you can get critical thinking skills. I think most of us at least most of us can develop critical thinking skills. The thing is how you go about developing it. Are you developing it by just listening to someone yap for 3 hours? And just have to kind of learn those critical thinking skills more on your own just so you can keep up with the class? Or are you learning that through analyzing a movie you really like, or a song that you are really passionate about, So that intrigue and that interest in the material, with whether it be the music, the film, the art, whatever it might be, that natural interest is going to help kind of get the ball rolling and just applying critical thinking skills in a wider range. So now you know how to apply that, not just in the context of a film or a song or art. Now you also can utilize those same skills in other areas too in your life. I remember Neil deGrasse Tyson said this one time. He was trying to use it as a justification to, for why should you care about math? He pretty much said how you're not going to use the skills in math in the context of the content. You're not quantum mechanics or whatever it might be. You're not really going to use that in your day-to-day life. You're not going to need Pythagorean theorem to pay the bills. But the skills that you might need to finish that test for that theorem, or maybe the skills you needed to learn how to memorize all that stuff. You can use those skills into other areas, So that's the whole point he tried to make. But my counterclaim to it has always been, well, you can still develop those same skills in other contexts that you have more of an interest in. So yeah, you can develop, good memorization skills through math, and you might not like it, but you can still learn it. But to me, it's like, well, why should we force kids to learn it this way through math if they can just learn it through watching their favorite movie? Like, I'm just using memorization as an example. Like, there's other critical thinking skills in general. I'm just using memorize. Like, you can just memorize the movie better, because you're actually interested in the movie, So it's not as hard to develop that skill, and the application skill, contextualizing. Like, why do we have to learn that through subjects that we are interested in on our own, like that we're not personally interested in? Why can't we just do it through films and movies and arts that we actually like? So I always thought that was a much better route to take on that front. And again, the research already shows it's better at developing those skills. So, and then towards the end, it says enhancing the memory of theories and concepts. So again, that kind of feeds into what I just talked about. If there's some kind of interest in the material through the movie, the art, the song, it helps with memorizing. And I also put the memorizing under important critical skills you need, And so by having that interest tied into it, it's going to help you enhance those critical thinking skills and the course material in general, So I always find it to just be, and again, it kind of goes to my whole point. I just find it a more effective way because you're tying in something that they already have a natural interest to. And so it's just an easier way for them to build critical thinking skills. And it's just easier on your part as a teacher. Would you rather have to feel like you're pulling teeth by doing a boring lecture that nobody really cares about? Or do you want to tie in a movie or a song to it? And then when you mix it in with the content, okay, then people started clicking with it more because you're tying in an existing interest they have, So it works. So some notes I also jot down were, obviously, I kind of mentioned the interest in the course material incentivizes stronger comprehension of the concepts, as already mentioned. And then the critical thinking skills, more dynamic because you're applying, contextualizing, writing. It's more dynamic because you're going outside just developing it through, a boring math class, or even in the concept of sociology, like a research paper. Like, yeah, you can get the same critical skills of contextualizing and applying like through a research paper. Like, you can still do that way, but it's just a much more boring way to do it. And it's not as dynamic, So you learn those. So by including film, music, art, it expands those skills into more interesting fields. And then the third point I wrote down, because of going back to the third point I mentioned, breaking down cultural and socioeconomic barriers. So I also highlighted this part of the study. It's stating that findings are also compared with data collected from a similar survey conducted in 2009, revealing that the overall favorable responses to art-based resources have remained consistent over time, and that this pedagogy remains an enduring approach that contributes to positive student learning experiences. So by having that research going back more than 10 decades and showing consistently that across students from different backgrounds and different settings, time periods, it's consistent that they have a better response to learning when you mix it in with film, art, music. Because again, like I mentioned, you're tying in a pre-existing interest that they already have to the content. And so that's going to lead to better student engagement. And so that already shows how this kind of method is a great tool to break down cultural and socioeconomic barriers, because it has great success over time periods and across many students, many of who are coming from different backgrounds and different academic, cultural, and social needs. So it can be a fantastic tool to break down those cultural and socioeconomic barriers with students, But again, it has to be something that I think more professors need to do. so that learning can be more engaging, but also just more culturally competent for students. Not everybody is coming from a culture and from a community where research papers and reading books is a great thing. They're not. But let's say you tie in, like, for example, like for me, like I don't come from a household that really prioritizes that. Like the highest a lot of my family has gone through their education has just been their associates. They never really gone so far to start doing full-fledged research papers, and reading deep into academic literature and things like that. Like I had to learn all that stuff on my own. And again, I've gained valuable skills by doing that. But again, I could have developed a lot of those valuable skills through cultural artifacts, movies, analyzing it through that way. I probably would have had a much easier time and a more enjoyable time if I did that. But again, that's because I'm coming from a background that's mainly Hispanic, and stuff like that isn't really prioritized much. There's been various generations before me where education just wasn't really prioritized. I was just lucky enough to have my mom, who was just the one member of the many people and many generations on her side of the family who didn't care about their education. And same thing for my dad's side too. So again, I'm lucky enough, but I feel like I probably would have had an easier time if it was more film based and not as much, okay, here's your long research paper you gotta do, guys. Go find it. So, it's one of those things where I feel like having that film, movie, art, music, it could really cater more to where people are at. Both, the backgrounds they're coming from, because, whether they're coming from a background that doesn't prioritize education, or maybe they're coming from another country, a whole different culture, And so just mixing it up, having that variety, with how you go about teaching. And you can definitely tie in with maybe music from a specific culture, and that culture might be from some students' background and that makes it a little more personal and interesting to them. So there's many ways you can go about doing it. But the whole point I'm trying to make is the evidence speaks for itself. The decades-long research and showing how, not decades, but just over a decade-long research, showing how over time periods across different backgrounds, it works. And that shows how it can be a powerful tool to help students from various different cultural and socioeconomic backgrounds. And really breaking down a lot of those barriers that students might have coming from a culture that might not prioritize, the academic wonders of research papers and readings and journal articles. Ooh. So, and this leads to my other points. So those are my three main points. And just to reiterate, it's, using film can be a great way to increase comprehension of complex sociological concepts. It's great for fostering more dynamic critical thinking skills, and it's a great tool to break down cultural and socioeconomic barriers. Now, and this kind of leads to the part of my thesis, it's teaching practices. Because here's the important part, and this is kind of where my own experience working in the education system really comes into play, which is that you need to have good instructional practices if you want to achieve a lot of your educational goals. Because all the reasons I can mention, all the great strengths of film and the arts, all of it can be completely negated if you don't have good teaching practices. Like, again, if you're just playing the movie and just be like, okay, guys, go do your analysis. Like, no. That, or just maybe pausing to have like a general conversation. I still don't think that's enough. What you need to do as an educator is incorporate active learning. Now, under a more technical term for active learning is Kagan structures. Now, Kagan structures it's those old school teaching practices that we're probably gonna know when we were in elementary. But once you get past middle and high school, when you get a bunch of professors or teachers who never took an education class, it starts to not be as frequent. But pretty much Kagan strategies are active learning methods that a lot of teachers incorporate in the classroom. So that can be think, pair, share. That can be corners where they go around the room and they, write, something about a definition or a term or an idea, and they write on like a board somewhere across in the corners of the classroom with groups, small groups. And think, pair, share. It's just, okay, here's a question. You go talk to your shoulder partner about that question. It's stuff like that. Jigsaw is another great one where you read a portion of the readings. Someone reads a portion and a section of the readings, and then when they come to class, they come together as experts of that section so they can go over it and explain it with everybody else. And then as a group, they come and present to the class, well, here is what we came up for this portion of the reading. This is what we came up with, and here's how we break it down. So those are just great methods you can use to maximize a lot of the learning process. But unfortunately, and again, there's research backing this up across different demographics, age groups, and again, I'll leave all of these in the comments on the video. So I have one by Gibson Lester saying, evaluating the effects of Kagan strategies on teaching strategies. Kagan structures on teaching strategies. An action and results study by U.S. Department of Education. So pretty much in this one, and I quoted this, stating that the data showed that more students were engaged during Kagan structures when compared to non-Kagan teaching strategies, and that Kagan structure use increased during the intervention. This qualitative action research design showed that Kagan structures improve teaching strategies by increasing student engagement. That's a big, big thing, because again, if you really want to maximize a lot of the potential of incorporating film into sociology, you need to also put that active learning. So you might ask them to watch a movie, and then you might say, okay, we're going to do a think, pair, share. Like, how would you apply this theory of the week into the movie? Go. Give them a few minutes to talk with their partner, and then you come back together as a class. And so, or just corners, where you might have, different theories or sociological concepts in the classroom, and you kind of break everybody into different groups where they kind of write down, their thoughts on how they think the movie that they were assigned affects or applies to the concept or the theory. And so those are just ideas that you can absolutely incorporate in the classroom. And again, the data shows that just has a much higher increase in student engagement. And then as a result of that, the higher interest, that higher engagement, it's going to lead to a lot of the same benefits mentioned in the previous study: better understanding of the sociological concepts, better critical thinking skills, more dynamic critical thinking skills. And so it's going to maximize a lot of the potential and the learning gains that you can get by incorporating film. And again, I feel like a lot of it can be negated if you just go up to the board and just yap about the movie, or you just show the movie, just call it a day. Like, again, you need to incorporate those active learning methods to really maximize the gains. And this is also goes even beyond just the U.S. Like, this is something that works internationally. I mean, I'll link all my research and all my studies into the assignment for the comments. So this study is titled "The Effects of Kagan Cooperative Learning Strategies in Teaching Subject-Verb Agreement Among Rural Sarawak Learners." I think that's how you say it, Sarawak. So in this study, and I quote it here, says, overall findings demonstrated that students showed positive feedback after the intervention was implemented. For students struggling to learn English in Malaysia, particularly students in rural schools of Sarawak struggling with subject-verb agreement. And so, again, it works not just in the U.S., it also works across the world. So this is something that has global success. And again, it's something that even I use in my classroom whenever I teach. I always do it, when I'm teaching first or second grade, and we're maybe doing, we're reading a book and we're breaking down the plot and the components of it. character intentions, main idea. And I've also done it even in pre-K, during centers where they might have to talk with their groups about, okay, well, I might read them a story and be like, okay, who do you think the main character was? Talk with your partner, give them like 15 seconds and then like, okay, guys, who's your favorite character? Or like, who's the main character? Whatever the question might be. So it's stuff that I use all the time, It's just that in elementary, you kind of have to do it to keep them interested because, like elementary, a lot of it is boom, 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 boom. Like you gotta get the content through because their attention spans are short, high energy, a lot of curiosity. You gotta really be boom, 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 boom with a lot of your stuff. You can't just go on the board and just talk for a whole lecture or talk to the students about like you have to go constant transitions, constant changes, boom, boom, this, that, like you gotta be way more dynamic. And so I have to do it all the time, but again, there's research showing it works across the board. Like the first study I showed you was in an elementary setting. The second one in Malaysia was with middle schoolers in adolescents. So it works across the board. And I've been someone who's taken education classes before. It is something that's been studied for decades. And again, it works across the board. It's just unfortunately, by the time you get to high school and college, nobody really does it outside of professors in the education department, because they're the ones that have actually studied a lot of this stuff. But outside of them, it's not very common to see Kagan strategies being done. So overall, film in sociology is a great addition, can add a lot of value, as I mentioned. Stronger comprehension skills, more dynamic critical thinking, breaking down socioeconomic barriers, great potential and great value it adds. But to maximize it and to really achieve a lot of those goals, as you also need to include your Kagan strategies to really maximize that potential and to really hit all the reasons and all the benefits that incorporating film through sociology can provide. Now, I also have a section for my counter arguments. So for counter arguments, first one, film is passive entertainment, which kind of ties into the whole thing of, oh, you're just sitting around, it's just an excuse to go sit around and watch movies. Now, what I wrote down here is counter argument. Active engagement through analysis, discussion, and reflection transforms passive watching into critical learning. This is why it is important that the instructor incorporates Kagan structures and pushes students to critically examine films. So again, going back to that active engagement, students need to be engaged, interested in the material in order for it to work. Look, could it just be passive entertainment and you're just watching movies all day? Absolutely. But you gotta make sure that your students are actually engaged, in the material. Now, how I would do that is through the Kagan strategies, to get people involved, and also and this is also an important part too, just picking interesting movies that actually cater to them. Like I mentioned, a lot of that cultural barriers and how maybe you get a movie from another culture and maybe one of the students is from that culture. Like I mentioned, I kind of hinted at it a little bit earlier. It's also important to consider that aspect too and not just pick some boring stuff, or like, something that, your little bubble of professors might think, oh, we think this is a great movie. No, get from the students, talk to the students, and let the students kind of curate, like we kind of do in our class. I think that's a great idea to really get students engaged. But again, to maximize that potential, in my opinion, you gotta have Kagan strategies. If you really want to fully counter that passive aspect, that passive criticism, and to really get full engagement. So my second counter argument, film oversimplifies or distorts sociology. Okay, so I think this is a fair one because there's plenty of movies that oversimplify a lot of concepts. Some of it's sociological, some of it not. So I think that's totally true. But at the same time, you also got to think, like, that's where it kind of comes back to having that critical eye and to show that interest and engagement. If you don't have that interest and engagement, then yeah, they're gonna take in that distorted understanding of sociology. That's why you have to promote that active engagement. You gotta promote that the active engagement, the interest, and that's how you can counter a lot of and make the learning a critical form of learning, not a passive learning. But again, like the evidence has shown across the world through decades of education research, Kagan strategies is the way to go if you want the straightforward, easiest way to do that, you know? So it's important that we use strategies like that, appropriate instructional strategies like Kagan, to transform what might be passive learning and passive watching of movies into critical watching, active watching of those movies. So it's very important to consider that. So next up, traditional methods are more rigorous. Now, there's a student perspective of mine, and then there's the professional one I wrote. So the student one of mine, it's rigorous because it's boring. That's why. It is not interesting. It is boring. It is tedious. It is not fun. Like the amount of research papers I have done in the past versus cultural analysis papers, it's like night and day. Cultural analysis papers, I can have a ball with and I can write for days on. Research papers? Snooze fest all day, tedious as hell. And this is coming from a sociology nerd. The case is probably even worse for someone who isn't even into sociology. This is coming from a nerd like me, and I think research papers are boring as hell. So it kind of shows the whole point. Like, okay, it's more rigorous because it's boring, so it feels more of a drag to get through. So now I have my more professional way I put that. So counter argument: rigor is not about the medium, but about how it is engaged. Films can be analyzed just as critically as text. Even text can be analyzed poorly, thus weakening rigor. Like the other counterpoints, it comes down to the instructor and the specific strategies they implement to promote critical engagement. Again, going back to Kagan strategies, making sure you utilize proper methods, because otherwise, again, you're gonna really negate a lot of the potential, because again, you might have movies that the students might be interested in, but again, if you're just kind of playing it, or just maybe just going to lecture about it, just rambling about the film, again, it kind of negates a lot of the potential that getting those films involved could have added, Again, it will probably still increase interest just because it is a movie and it's content that they're interested in, but it really misses the mark on what that potential could have been, and that's where Kagan strategies can really get you there. So again, we got our conclusion. So I don't know why I said it again, but it's conclusion. So conclusion, and I'll expand off my bullet points here. So film analysis can enhance sociological learning by offering a wide framework for critical engagement. Adds value compared to traditional methods by 1, promoting stronger comprehension of complex sociological concepts. 2, fostering more dynamic critical thinking skills. 3, breaking down cultural and socioeconomic barriers. All those I mentioned, and we broke it down one by one. As long as the instructor applies sound instructional practices, critical engagement through film can be just as valuable and rigorous, if not more, than traditional methods. These values showcase film's ability to expand the framework of critical and rigorous engagement. So, look, I'm going to be very biased for Kagan because I use it all the time, and I work in education, in public. But again, the evidence is hard to counter. It's something that's so agreed upon. If you took an education class, which I have, it's just a generally agreed upon thing that you gotta do active learning. You gotta do Kagan strategies when you are in that classroom and when you're doing your assignments, because the amount of evidence showing that it works is overwhelming, and it is over decades upon decades upon decades of research. It just leads to better learning outcomes, more engaged students, and it just makes boring concepts much easier to teach, It just does. And it makes students more interested in what you're doing, and also allows an easier time for teachers. Again, is it gonna work all the time? No. Can you be 100% Kagan? No. I mean, obviously, we're humans. We're not perfect. We are not going to be robots, so, and also, not every student is gonna fall into those parameters of Kagan working. Like, Kagan, a lot of the research and research in general, it's statistics. It's general. It's not gonna work in every situation. It's not gonna work for every student. That's why it's important that you give students options, So, and you also have that flexibility too. So, I'm not trying to advocate saying like, you gotta be 100% Kagan, 100% Kagan. No. You could do a little lecturing, that's fine. But the problem is you can't make most of it or all of it just lectures. You need to mix it up. Like, have half and half. Have half the time be a lecture, and have the other half of the time be Kagan strategies. Like if you have a 50-minute class on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you can do 20-minute lecture, 20-minute Kagan strategies, get that extra 10 minutes for wiggle room if you need to transition or do something different, and then boom, done. And you just do that all the time they go there. Or if it's like a 3-hour class, okay, 3 hours is a little tricky to do, for Kagan strategies, because but you can still do like Jigsaw. Like Jigsaw it takes a little more time to do. So you can absolutely do that, where they'll read it and they'll read the section that they're supposed to be experts on, and they come together and they present to the class. Like that requires a little more to it. So you could definitely do like, I don't know, an hour for the lecture, an hour for the Kagan strategy, and then, have that last hour be wrapping it up and do presenting of Jigsaw stuff. So whatever it might be. There's multiple different ways you can configure it. I'm just giving general ideas here. But that's how you maximize the learning, Like, yeah, will the students be more engaged because you included a movie they liked? Yeah. There's already going to be a default, a natural increase in engagement. But are you really going to maximize that comprehension of theoretical concepts? Are you really going to maximize breaking down those barriers in culture and socioeconomics? Are you really going to maximize those a more dynamic set of critical thinking skills? No. You gotta incorporate that active learning if you really want to hit the marks on all those things. So that's just my general opinion. I feel you need to mix the two together. Get the films in, for art, the music that they're interested in. Let the students have a voice in picking that, but also mix in that active learning involved to really maximize everything. And best of all, you can't chat GPT any of that. Woo! That's always been my big thing. Because, and this could be a side tangent, but I mean, for professors, or even high school and middle school teachers, if you really want to address ChatGPT, just do more active learning. Like they can't ChatGPT. You can't ChatGPT that, because otherwise it's going to be this wild, never-ending goose chase of cracking down on AI and knowing what's this and what's that. It's going to be this never-ending goose chase because AI is going to get stronger. It's going to develop more. And there's going to be all these new ways you got to find out to crack down on it. Like, it's just like, it hurts your brain. It really hurts your brain, And also, even in a high school, like not a high school setting, but even a college setting, because I've done think, pair, shares, and active learning in college. It's preferred because, are you working in groups doing it? Yes, but it's not like, again, by you doing it, it's not like a group. It's not a group like a group project where it's gonna be weeks upon weeks of you having to work with these people. It's just in the class, you're together working on it, and you actually have dedicated time in the class to work together, and it's not just, oh yeah, do it on your own, find time to meet up or whatever, or like, it just doesn't work like it's not like because that's where most of the problems with group projects come up, because people have an issue with that, and because they and I even polled this in my education class. They've always have an issue with group projects because of this when they're outside of class and they have to come together. And they're like, oh, my mom died, or oh, I'm busy working. Oh, this happened, that happened, this happened, and then when they get to do the assignments, it comes out like complete shit. So that's why having the assignments in the class where they're all together and the teacher, you as professor, can watch them and see who's doing shit, like that's what fucking matters, and that has a better response with kids. That's why Kagan strategies work better. That's why they have better responses for kids. That's why even at college level, they're fine with it. I even did it in Dr. Miller's class when I had to present and did Think, Pair, Shares. And I'd easily say that was a much more memorable lecture. I mean, not to like glaze myself, but it was much more memorable because people were much more actively involved, because I had active learning stuff. People actually talked about the issues, and what we were discussing. So it works across age groups and demographics. It's a great tool to maximize the learning process. So overall, I believe adding film is a great idea. It's not just a waste of time. As long as you have the right instructional strategies, promote critical engagement, active engagement, genuine interest, it can really be a valuable tool, film. It can be great into developing a lot of the pros that I mentioned and really but if you want to really maximize those gains and those potentials, Kagan strategy is where it's at. So that's my little podcast. Covered everything I needed to, showed the importance of Kagan strategies and just having film and sociology. It really helps. It has a lot of great benefits. And yeah, so I hope you enjoyed it. I try to make this as entertaining as possible. I try to get a decent setup going on. I did like, I don't know, I feel this is kind of more of a Ben Shapiro Daily Wire setup I got going here, but I hope it's good. I hope it was interesting and you guys were interested. Whoever you're interested in hearing me babble for that long. So I hope everybody I hope everybody's having a good time and hope everybody enjoyed this podcast. Me, Jonathan Arboleda, signing out.